Kichwa na kichwa chake kikubwa.
Chris, who's one on?
Iko sawa. Oh. Up. Yeah? Yeah? Cable.
One, two, check. Check one. Kasa. One, two.
So are we ready? Yeah? So we can start. Are we ready? Okay. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the Fourth Estate. I've called this press conference this afternoon to talk about the prevailing fuel crisis in Kenya. In my view, Kenya is today teetering on the edge of an economic meltdown. The latest monthly fuel prices, which were announced by EPRA, covering the period from 15th May to 14th June 2026, raised the price of diesel in Nairobi to Kenya shillings 242.92 per litre, and that of petrol to Kenya shillings 214.25 per litre. This could well become the last straw that breaks the camel's back for millions of struggling Kenyans. Kenyan citizens, in my view, now carry one of the heaviest fuel cost burdens in the world. And I'm not espousing this in a vacuum. It is informed by comparative analysis, benchmarked with what is happening elsewhere, both within the region and other parts of the world. I've benchmarked Kenya's current fuel prices against regional peers and global averages, and the findings are deeply alarming. As at yesterday morning, Kenya had the highest diesel prices in East Africa, with diesel retailing at 242.92 per litre, and by comparison, diesel costs approximately, if you convert to Kenya shillings 199 in Uganda, Kenya shillings 189.49 in Tanzania, Kenya shillings 225 in Rwanda, Kenya shillings 192 in South Africa, Kenya shillings 148 in Ghana, and about Kenya shillings 110 per litre in Ethiopia. Even after last evening's changes by EPRA, minimal changes by EPRA, Kenya still has the highest diesel prices in East Africa, with diesel now retailing at 232.86 per litre, compared to the same statistics I had alluded to earlier. That is 199 Kenya shillings in Uganda, 189.49 in Tanzania, 225 in Rwanda, 192 in South Africa, 148 in Ghana, and about 110 in Ethiopia. As far as the price of petrol is concerned, you remember even the last evening there were no adjustments on petrol prices. So Kenya retails at Kenya shillings 214.25 per litre. And if you compare and contrast with what is prevailing in other jurisdictions, you will realize that we are still the highest. Compare this with 200.50 Kenya shillings in Uganda, Kenya shillings 190.19 in Tanzania, and Kenya shillings 111.79 in Ethiopia. But over and above looking at the prevailing prices in the East African region, we also need to benchmark with what is happening globally, because the fuel market is one big global market. Globally, the average petrol price stands at approximately Kenya shillings 188.60 per litre, while diesel on average goes at about 204.10 per litre. The implication of this is that Kenya's petrol prices were, prior to last evening's EPRA adjustments, approximately 13.6% above the global average, while diesel prices were about 19% higher than international averages. Even after last evening's minimal adjustments by EPRA, Kenya's petrol prices remains 19% above the global average, because there was no change in the price of petrol. while that of DSL is still 14.1% higher than the global average. This comparative analysis confirms that Kenya has become both a regional and global outlier in fuel pricing, thereby exposing citizens, businesses, transporters, farmers, and manufacturers to one of the harshest fuel cost burdens anywhere in the world. If we look back in retrospect, ever since Kenya attained independence the year 1963, these statistics above are among the highest fuel prices ever imposed on the Kenyan people. Not even the COVID-19 global shutdown that disrupted international logistics and supply chains, or the Russia-Ukraine war, not even the 2008 global oil shock, the Arab Spring, the Libya conflict, the Gulf Wars, or previous Iran-linked Middle East crisis pushed Kenya's fuel prices to these punishing astronomical levels that we are witnessing today. With these prices, every liter of fuel purchased by citizens, motorists, industrialists, farmers, transporters, and ordinary Kenyans from all walks of life is bleeding the Kenyan economy liter by liter. If urgent measures are not taken with speed and seriousness, the runaway fuel prices will trigger a full-blown national economic crisis with devastating consequences for households, for jobs, the entire production value chain, and the overall cost of living index. Every sector of the Kenyan economy depends on fuel. And when fuel prices spiral out of control, correspondingly, food prices will surge. Transport costs will skyrocket. Production will slow down. Businesses will shut down. Jobs will disappear. And millions of households will be pushed deeper into abject poverty. The mamamboga now pays more to transport vegetables to the market. And farmers are forced to spend more on irrigation, machinery, and transport of produce. Manufacturers face rising production and distribution costs, while workers increasingly struggle to afford fare to their workplaces if there is means of transport in the first place. As we speak, there is no means of transport. Those who are making it to work are going on foot. When Kenyans can no longer afford to grow food, travel to work, power their homes and businesses, or transport children to school, and when industries can no longer produce competitively because of runaway energy costs, the consequences extend far beyond the economy. And at that point, the country will not only face a severe cost of living and food security crisis, but also the real danger of a full-blown national security crisis driven by economic distress, social frustration, and growing public desperation and anger. As of today, this economic distress, social frustration, and growing public desperation is already grinding the country to a halt, with roads blocked, businesses closed, transport disrupted, infrastructure destroyed, schools closed, and the insecurity and violence that often accompanies the resultant public protests at the runaway fuel prices are also rearing their ugly heads. The government, therefore, must act now and not wait for a national crisis before responding to this dire situation. As we speak, I've already held consultations with various local and foreign investors. And in their view, Kenya is losing its comparative advantage and attractiveness to investors due to the high cost of doing business and may lose its status as a preferred investment destination in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, Kenya is bleeding at the pump, and the economy is rapidly hemorrhaging. We are weakening the very lifeline of our economy through these fuel price increases, and decisive action must now be taken. If I may ask, how can a landlocked Uganda have cheaper diesel than Kenya when most of its fuel passes through Kenya? How can Tanzania and Ghana maintain significantly lower fuel prices than Kenya? And how do we rationalize the fact that despite global fuel price hikes exhibited by tensions in the Middle East, it is Kenya that continues to bear one of the heaviest burdens? It just doesn't make sense. So you cannot continue advancing the argument that the prevailing fuel prices is as a result of the war, because other countries are equally facing the consequences of the war. But their governments have come in as agents of necessity to rationalize the fuel prices through relevant and appropriate policy and structural interventions. That means there's something amiss with us. The truth, therefore, is simple, that Kenya fuel prices are no longer being driven purely by global oil prices. They are driven by overtaxation, failed or lopsided policy choices, non-competitive fuel import arrangements, and misplaced government priorities. No economy can grow when the cost of movement, the cost of production, and survival also becomes unbearable. In my view, the primary drivers behind the runaway fuel prices, one, of course, is the global oil prices, crude oil prices, the rising international crude oil prices, which is driven by geopolitical tensions, such as the Iran conflict and border instability in the Middle East. But it cannot be used as an excuse for failure to put in place the necessary interventions by government. The second cause of the current skyrocketing fuel prices, in my view, is the so-called government-to-government or G2G oil deal. The government-to-government fuel import arrangement, which was initially introduced to stabilize supply and lower prices, has failed to deliver meaningful relief to consumers. Concerns also have emerged over reduced market competitiveness and inefficiencies within the import framework. And despite government interventions, including subsidies financed through the Petroleum Development Levy Fund, the fuel prices, particularly diesel, have continued to hit record highs. In fact, even within this G2G arrangement, in a free market economy, I mean, it beats logic why you should actually confine that arrangement to 2 or 3 companies. Why not open it up for purposes of competitiveness? Yeah? Why not open it up? Yeah? We are witnessing a situation where it's either being undertaken in the context of a duopolistic or oligopolistic or monopolistic market structure with just few players, as opposed to a competitive market arrangement. Yeah? And that begs for answers to quite a number of substantive questions. The other cause, in my view, is the high taxation and levies. Heavy taxation, in my view, remains one of the biggest contributors to high fuel prices in Kenya. A substantial proportion of the pump price, estimated at about Kenya shillings 80 per litre, is attributed to taxes, levies, and regulatory charges. And consequently, even when global oil prices ease or tax reductions are announced, the cumulative burden of these charges continues to keep fuel prices elevated and the cost of living painfully high. In fact, a discussion we need to have at a different time is whether or not some of the levies we are putting on fuel and other services or products are within the confines of the law, because the Constitution only calls for tax and charges, not levies. But that's a discussion we'll leave for another day, the constitutionality of some of these levies that we are imposing. So what is the economic impact of skyrocketing fuel prices? One, this skyrocketing fuel prices is profound. Inflation has already climbed to 5.6% in April 2026, driven largely by rising transport and production costs. The recent oil price spike is estimated to have cost Kenyans an additional 20 billion in just 2 months, and consequently, the country's economic growth forecast for 2026 has been revised downward to 5%. The most worrying thing, good people, is that once we have that rise in inflation, almost all costs of essential commodities, goods and services, is going to correspondingly go up within the not too distant future. So Kenyans will continue losing their purchasing power as a result of the cost of living index. Businesses now face higher operational costs, which are ultimately passed on to consumers by way of higher prices. And this will lead eventually to higher and higher cost of living index. The transport, agriculture, and manufacturing sectors are particularly vulnerable, threatening food security, industrial productivity, and overall economic stability. The steep rise in fuel prices has worsened an already grim economic outlook in Kenya. It is now a no-brainer that millions of Kenyans are struggling to put food on the table, let alone meet their daily basic needs. The prices of essential commodities such as sugar, cereals, tomatoes, and have gone up. And Mama Mboga or ordinary mwananchi can barely make ends meet, while the working class has become increasingly frustrated and economically disenfranchised due to excessive taxation, or punitive taxation if you want to call it. This additional fuel price hike burden means many workers can no longer afford to drive to work. Even affording public transport has become increasingly difficult. The net effect is a stressed population, a frustrated working class, and a country that is rapidly losing economic confidence and social stability. We cannot, good people, allow our people to be pushed any further to the brink. And this is why I'm proposing urgent policy interventions as follows. One, immediate fiscal interventions, reduction or removal of VAT on fuel. The current 8% value-added tax on fuel products significantly contributes to high pump prices, and I propose the reduction or complete scrapping of this VAT. While such a move could result in short-term revenue losses for the government, the economic stimulus generated by lower fuel prices could offset part of the loss through increased economic activity and broader tax generation. You are aware that a substantial proportion of our economy, especially the manufacturing sector, relies on fuel. If we drastically reduce the cost of fuel by doing away with VAT, we are bound to enhance the level of economic activity, and by extension, tax revenues will follow suit. So it's just a question of doing the balancing the correct way. Two, we need to review and reform the levies. Several levies significantly contribute to the high cost of living, including the high cost of fuel, including the road maintenance levy and the petroleum development levy. While the petroleum development levy has been used for price stabilization, serious questions continue to be raised regarding its application, transparency, and accountability. I therefore call for a comprehensive review of all fuel-related levies with a view to reducing, streamlining, or rationalizing them. This is urgent, and it needs to be done as soon as yesterday. The third issue is proposal is capping oil marketing company margins. During periods of economic crisis, as the situation we are in, the government should consider temporarily capping the margins of oil marketing companies and retailers to prevent excessive profiteering, or abnormal profits if you want to call it, and ensure that any reduction in import costs or taxes are fully passed on to consumers by way of lower prices. However, such measures should be undertaken carefully to avoid discouraging investment in the sector. The second phase of proposals I want to advance are structural and long-term interventions. And in this regard, I propose, one, the establishment of a strategic petroleum reserve. Kenya as a country currently lacks a functional national strategic petroleum reserve. Establishing such reserves would allow the country to purchase petroleum products when global prices are low, and then offload the same to the market during periods of high prices or supply disruptions. This would provide an important buffer against global volatility and in equal measure strengthen national energy security. The next long-term intervention I'm proposing is the re-evaluation and reform of the G2G oil deal. The current government-to-government fuel import arrangement has been criticized for its lack of transparency and failure to secure competitive prices. The government should urgently re-evaluate the framework and consider transitioning towards a more open and competitive procurement model that allows multiple suppliers and promotes better price discovery. An independent audit is also necessary to evaluate the current arrangement to confirm the veracity or otherwise of allegations that perhaps the current G2G deal is informed by commercial interests. 3, diversification of supply sources and routes. Kenya's over-reliance on limited supply routes and suppliers exposes the country to geopolitical and logistical risks. We need to explore alternative supply routes and diversify international suppliers to strengthen resilience against disruptions and potentially improve pricing competitiveness. Then number 4, we need more frequent price reviews. You see, this oil market is a highly volatile market, and the rate of dynamism is so fast to the extent that if you want to remain relevant by way of pricing in that market, then you also need to review your prices as frequently as possible based on changes which are taking place in the global oil market. In our case, EPRA is undertaking the reviews on a monthly basis. Why should we be stuck to 1 month? These prices keep on fluctuating. So we need more frequent reviews. The current monthly fuel price review cycle by EPRA is not sufficiently responsive during periods of extreme volatility. We need to introduce more frequent reviews, particularly during global crises, as is the situation now, to ensure that reductions in international oil prices are passed on to consumers more quickly. You see what is happening now? If the prices in the global market go down, yeah, the importers benefit by way of abnormal prices. But that price cut or reduction is not passed on to the consumer by way of lower fuel prices. They have to wait for another 1 month cycle. Why the 1 month cycle? Yeah? This is benefiting the oil market outlets as opposed to the final consumer. Reduction in international prices must be passed on to the consumer by way of corresponding lower prices. And then 5, we need investment in local refining capacity. In the long term, investing in and modernizing local refining capacity could reduce Kenya's dependence on imported refined petroleum products. It would lower logistical costs and reduce foreign exchange pressure and enhance national energy security. And then finally, we need also to promote alternative energy sources through the relevant policy interventions. The current fuel crisis could serve as a wake-up call for Kenya as a country to accelerate the transition towards alternative energy sources, promoting electric mobility, expanding public transport infrastructure, and incentivizing renewable energy adoption across industries would reduce reliance on fossil fuels and shield the economy from future global shocks. So, in conclusion, good people, the rocketing fuel prices in Kenya represent a serious national economic crisis driven by a dangerous combination of global shocks, excessive domestic taxation, and structural inefficiencies within the fuel import system. Comparative analysis, which I've already alluded to, clearly shows, or depicts, that Kenya has become both a regional and global outlier in fuel pricing. You see, this war has affected everybody. So if the war has affected everybody, why would it be that even next door in Tanzania or next door in Uganda, they are able to require decisive, bold, and comprehensive action from government by implementing immediate fiscal relief measures, as I've already alluded to, alongside the strategic long-term reforms. Kenya would then be able to reduce the burden currently crushing households and businesses, strengthen the energy sector security, and restore economic confidence, and place the country back on path towards sustainable economic growth and development. As we speak, all factors being held constant, Kenya is at crossroads. People are hungry, helpless, and angry, and we cannot continue like that. End of statement. Any question? Any question, or it is loud and clear and straightforward? There is a soft copy of this press statement. We should be able to can be shared with you people. Yeah, kuna swali? Huh? It was straightforward. Okay, so we'll get soft copies. He has a soft copy, so can you share the soft copies with them? So it will make their work easier. Okay? Yes, sir.
My name is Mashari Mbuga.
Yes.
NTV specifically.
NTV?
Yes.
Yes.
So this is just a claim, but not sure, but is there any word you have about it? Probably reasons as to why we've had the government does not want to pull them VAT taxes and also the levies, as most leaders have been calling for. And the word is, there is a possibility those levies or the tax, the VAT has been used as a security for loans. I don't know if that has reached your word or so, or what is your take about that?
Well, we'll bring them into the what? Into the tax bracket. That is what we need to do. And it's very easy to sort it out during the process of budgeting. Just direct resources to where the jobless youth are in the Juakali sector. And direct resources where our mothers and sisters are so that they can get involved in, at a bare minimum, some itinerary trade. If you bring on board that critical mass of Kenyans into the income bracket, they'll be able to pay tax. So the net effect, therefore, would be that you will be able to drastically reduce the current level of taxation, without reducing a corresponding reduction in the net revenues, domestic tax revenues, because you are bringing in more people into the what? Into the income bracket and by extension the tax bracket. So that's where really we should start from. Yeah? So utilization of the tax, whether you are using the tax, the VAT as security, is a different issue altogether and a separate discussion. Yeah. So it's just basic economics that we need to apply. Yeah. Yeah? And then you seal the revenue leakages in government. Yeah? Seal the revenue leakages and then stop corruption. Yeah? And cut down wastage. If you go to Naivasha on a weekday, today, these hotels around en route towards the flower farms. Go to the parkings of those hotels. You will see those parkings full of government vehicles. Yeah? And people are in there in the hotels for conferences. Which conferences are these which must be held in hotels in today's world of technology? Why can't these meetings be held virtually? Yeah? So those are revenue leakages and wastage, which if we cut down wastage in government, sealed loopholes for corruption, we will be good to go, and we'll have enough resources to direct to more essential sectors like education, like health, which are today bleeding out of inefficiencies and structural misalignment. Yeah. So those are the facts of the case. Asanteni.